Hello and welcome to Agile Project Management 101, Running Meetings for a Scrum Sprint. We're going to be discussing our last meeting relative to the number of meetings that we are covering in this course. So we're going to be talking about the Sprint Retrospective. And as the Sprint Review focus a lot on the product and getting stakeholder feedback and closing that feedback loop that we talked about, the Sprint Retrospective is more the application of that feedback loop and discussing more around the process of handling some of these items within a sprint. Now, a sprint retrospective does not have to be a long meeting by any means. It doesn't have to be a detailed dive into the ins and outs of the process. It can be, but oftentimes it's simply confirming and slowly changing the process to meet the needs as those needs slowly change as well. And one of the pieces that we're going to be utilizing in the sprint retrospective to make those changes is goal planning. So we talked about the sprint goal previously, but obviously within the actual process, you should be using goal planning as well. It's about the process around development or creation, if you happen to be in a design team or a web team, whatever that is. The process around what the work you are doing is focused on in the sprint retrospective. And just like in the sprint review meeting, you're going to be talking about what went well and what didn't go well. Again, the sprint review meeting does a really nice job of closing the feedback loop and teeing up for the next couple of meetings that you're going to be having. And that includes a sprint retrospective. So talking about what went well from a process standpoint, as well as what didn't go well. And this can be oftentimes things like maybe a development environment wasn't set up correctly. Listing those ideas and things that went well and didn't go well often establishes a trend or a pattern and can lead to better processes when it comes to handling the team. So in the instance of maybe a new technology was introduced and that caused problems, maybe the team prefers to utilize some of the old technology platforms that are still stable and supported, and you should be using that as a process and a standard going forward, and maybe doing some retraining on the new technology and waiting for that to mature a little bit more. So again, that's just an example of taking what went well, what didn't go well, and applying a goal to it, which again is a big piece of the sprint retrospective with regards to the process. And the goal should really be changes for the next sprint. This isn't necessarily something that you want to do a year from now. Ideally, these goals should be for the next sprint. A great way to plan for this is to do a brainstorming session. A brainstorming session is a great way to elicit those ideas for how to handle this in the next sprint. Again, we want this to be an immediate iteration on what you've been working on, not something that's for 5 years down the road. After you've completed the brainstorming session and maybe narrowed down to 5 ideas for the next sprint, you want to get that commitment and the buy-in from the team, and if applicable, the stakeholders as well. So the development team or the design team, whatever team you are working on, you want buy-in on those changes coming from this retrospective. If there are any updates to the actual work itself based on these goals, you can definitely make them after the sprint retrospective. So if you need to update the backlog to create someday maybe board instead of just a backlog where it's these items that are clogging up the backlog that are just ideas more than they are actually fully formed stories, as an example. Maybe another example would be that you need to start accepting fewer stories in the sprint because developers are overwhelmed and task switching too often and don't necessarily know where to begin. So it's okay to make these changes to the actual items after the sprint retrospective, but it should be done in the context of improving the process. Along with that, you want to make sure that you're prioritizing these goals as well. As a team, you should prioritize and decide what should be included in the next iteration. You want the team to agree to the goal and have items to implement in the next sprint. And that's the sprint retrospective in a nutshell, working on those processes. And it is the last item within a single sprint. And at the end of it, you would start the sprint over again with sprint planning based on the feedback that you got from the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about managing meetings. Just a general section discussing how to manage meetings. Thanks for watching.